What sound woke the first humans? It wasn't the jarring ring of an alarm clock, but perhaps the howl of a distant wolf, the sudden chill of a dying fire, or the persistent cough of a clan member huddled nearby. Before history had a name, before empires rose and fell, there was only the rhythm of survival, dictated by the sun and the seasons. Tonight, we journey back to that world, to feel the cold earth beneath our feet and the warmth of the first fires on our skin. Then, from the dawn of humanity, we will leap forward to the dawn of a new, terrifying age, where a different kind of fire was born, one that threatened to consume the world. Dim the lights, settle in, and let's begin our journey through two of history's most pivotal dawns. The world of our earliest ancestors was not governed by clocks, but by the slow, silent arc of the sun. Dawn wasn't an event. It was a process. It began not with light, but with a subtle shift in the air, a lightening of the deep, star-dusted dark into a bruised purple, then a soft gray for a Paleolithic human waking up inside a cave or a makeshift hut was a multi-sensory experience. The first sensation might be the cold, a damp chill seeping up from the packed earth floor, a stark reminder that the night's fire was fading. You slept in a tight, breathing cluster of body's family, extended kin, a band of maybe 20 or 30 souls. Privacy was an unknown concept. The snores, coughs, and murmurs of your companions were the soundtrack to your dreams. You slept on a bed of dried grasses or animal hides. The familiar, musky scent of fur and worn leather, a strange sort of comfort. The fire, the beating heart of your small universe, was always nearby. It wasn't for ambience. It was life itself. It offered warmth against the biting cold. Its light kept the deep cave shadows at bay, and its smoke was a fragile shield against the insects and the things with claws and teeth that hunted in the dark. The first task of the day, before any thought of food or water, was to check the fire. If it had dwindled to a pile of sullen, gray embers, a quiet panic would ripple through the waking group. Someone, usually a designated keeper or whoever drew the short stick, would have to coax it back to life. This was a painstaking art, requiring patience, dry tinder, and the rhythmic, exhausting work of a fire drill rubbing a stick in a wooden notch until friction gifted you a single, precious spark. If it was cold or damp, this process could take what felt like an eternity until the flames licked upward again. A collective crankiness would hang in the air, a silent tension understood by all. To lose the fire was to lose your foothold in a hostile world. Once the fire was stable, you'd move to your tools, a spear with a chipped flint point, a hand axe worn smooth by your grip, a scraper for cleaning hides. These weren't possessions. They were extensions of your own body. You would run a thumb over an edge, testing its sharpness. A dull tool meant a failed hunt, an inability to butcher a kill, or worse, a moment of helplessness in the face of danger. In this world, you were only as capable as the tools you kept. If you woke up, your clan was beside you. Your fire was burning, and your spear was sharp. You were already winning the day. Breakfast was not a right, but a privilege. More often than not, it was a question mark. If yesterday's hunt was successful, you might awaken to the smell of leftover roasted meat, a piece of which would be your reward for surviving another night. But such fortunes were rare. Most mornings began with an empty stomach and a pressing task. Foraging. This wasn't a leisurely stroll through nature. It was a meticulous, knowledge-driven search for survival. The foraging party, often composed of women, elders, and children too young for the hunt, would set out as the morning light grew stronger. Their eyes were trained to scan the landscape not for its beauty, but for its utility. They sought edible roots to be dug from the earth with sharpened sticks, berry bushes whose seasonal cycles they knew by heart, and nuts that had to be cracked open with well-aimed rocks. Every plant had a story, a purpose. This one's leaves could be crushed to soothe a wound. That one's berries were sweet, but its look-alike cousin was a fast track to agony. This knowledge was a sacred inheritance, passed down through generations, not in books, but in gestures, in shared meals, and in stern warnings. The world of a forager was a library of textures and smells. They knew the damp, earthy scent of a patch where tubers grew thick, the specific rustle of leaves that hid a bird's nest, and the sharp, sweet perfume of wild honey, a prize worth the risk of a swarm of angry bees. They also gathered more than just food. Firewood was a constant necessity. Feathers could be used for fletching arrows. Strong plant fibers could be woven into cordage or baskets. Nothing was wasted. Insects were a reliable, if unglamorous, source of protein. A termite mound or a log teeming with grubs might constitute the morning's entire protein intake. It wasn't a delicacy, but it was fuel. Children learned by doing. They tagged along, their small hands mimicking the motions of their elders, their sharp eyes spotting things the adults might miss. They also learned the hard lessons, the sting of a nettle, the bitter taste of a wrong leaf. It was an education written in small pains and quiet discoveries, while the hunters pursued the dramatic, high-risk prize of a large mammal. It was the foragers who provided the steady, reliable foundation of the clan's diet. On the many days when the hunters returned with only tired feet and excuses, it was the basket of roots, berries, and greens that saved everyone from hunger. The foragers were the silent, unsung heroes of the Paleolithic world. While foraging provided the daily bread, the hunt provided the feast. It was the great gamble, the central drama of Paleolithic life, hunting large game like mammoths, Bison or wild horses was not a sport. It was a full-scale military operation, demanding strategy, courage, and flawless teamwork from every able-bodied member of the band. It began not with a chase, but with whispers and signs. Scouts would return to camp, their gestures and quiet words painting a picture of a herd's location, its size, and its movements. A plan would form around the fire, a strategy woven from generations of experience. The hunt was a symphony of coordinated chaos. The goal was rarely a direct confrontation in an open field. That was suicide. Instead, they used the landscape as their primary weapon. A hunt might involve driving a herd towards a natural choke point, a narrow ravine, or a steep cliff edge. This required a line of beaters, people who would use nose, fire, and their very presence to guide the terrified animals towards the trap. The air would fill with shouts, the thud of thrown rocks, and the pounding of running feet. Then came the moment of the ambush. From concealed positions, the hunters would strike. Spears tipped with razor-sharp flint points hardened in fire would fly through the air. The aim wasn't necessarily to kill instantly, but to wound, to slow a beast down, to separate it from the herd. A well-placed spear in a mammoth's flank was the beginning, not the end. The real danger came next. A wounded mammoth was a thrashing, trumpeting mountain of fury. It could crush a man with a single step or impale him with a sweep of its enormous tusks. The hunters had to be agile, dancing in and out of range, their lives depending on their ability to anticipate the animal's next move. If the ambush at a cliff was successful, the aftermath was a scene of both triumph and grim labor. The foe would have done most of the work, but the butchering process was a race against time and other predators. Every part of the animal was a treasure. The meat would be carved up and distributed. Bones would be cracked open for their rich, nutritious marrow. Hides would be carefully removed to be tanned for clothing and shelter. Sinew would be dried to be used as cordage and thread. Even the stomach could be used as a waterproof bag. A successful hunt meant security. It meant a full week of food, new materials for tools and clothes, and a surge of status and respect for those who led the charge. But failure was just as common. A hunt could end with nothing more than injuries, exhaustion, and the long, silent walk back to a hungry camp. It was the ultimate risk for the ultimate reward. As dusk painted the sky in shades of orange and deep violet, the scattered members of the band would return to the one place that felt like home. The fire. The day's labor would cease, and the social heart of the clan would begin to beat. The fire was more than just a source of heat and light. It was the original living room, theater, and town hall, all rolled into one. Here, around the hypnotic dance of the flames, The community was forged anew each night. This was where stories were told. A hunter would recount the day's chase, his tale growing grander with each telling, his arms mimicking the size of the horns, his voice dropping to a whisper as he described the moment of the kill. An elder might share a legend of the ancestors, a story of how the first spear was made, or a cautionary tale about the spirits that lived in the dark woods. This wasn't just entertainment. Oral storytelling was the Paleolithic library, a living archive of knowledge, history, and belief. It taught the young which animals to fear, which paths to follow, and what it meant to be part of the tribe. Music, in its most primal form, often filled the firelit space. The rhythm might come from two stones being struck together, the hollow thud of a hand against a stretched high, or the haunting, breathy notes from a flute carved out of a bird's bone. Chants would rise and fall, simple, repetitive melodies that bound the group together in a shared sound. Children would spin and dance in the flickering light, their movements unchoreographed and joyous. This was also where the day's bounty was shared. The smell of roasting meat would mingle with the wood smoke, a scent of success and security. Food was distributed, often according to complex social rules. The best hunters might get the choicest cuts, but sharing was paramount. A selfish hunter was a liability, for everyone knew that today's success could be tomorrow's failure, and you needed your clan to survive the lean times. It was a delicate dance of status and cooperation, and in the quiet moments, as the fire crackled and the stars emerged in the vast, silent sky, people would simply sit. They would mend their tools, tend to their children, or just stare into the flames, lost in thought. In this shared space of warmth and light, they found more than safety from the cold and the dark. They found connection. They found their place in the universe. They found each other. From the first flickers of man-made fire in a Paleolithic cave, we journeyed tens of thousands of years forward, across the rise and fall of empires, to a fire of a different kind, a fire not of wood, but of atoms, a fire born not of friction, but of fission. In the winter of 1938, in a laboratory in Berlin, two German scientists, Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann, stumbled upon something that would forever alter the course of human history. While bombarding uranium with neutrons, they achieved the unthinkable. They had split the atom. The news of nuclear fission spread through the global physics community like a shockwave. The implications were terrifyingly clear. If this process could be controlled and chained, it could release an amount of energy that dwarfed any explosion ever witnessed. In the United States, a group of refugee scientists who had fled fascism in Europe understood the stakes with chilling clarity. If Nazi Germany, home to some of the world's most brilliant physicists, Were to harness this power first, the world would face an unimaginable catastrophe. Led by the Hungarian physicist Leo Szilard, they decided to act. Szilard, along with his renowned colleague Albert Einstein, drafted a letter to U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, signed by Einstein for its immense gravity. The letter, delivered in October 1939, was a stark warning. The Germans might be developing an extremely powerful bomb of a new type. Roosevelt was cautious, but he listened. He formed an advisory committee on uranium, allocating a small amount of funding. The idea of an atomic weapon still seemed like science fiction. But as World War II engulfed the globe, the fiction began to feel dangerously real. The attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941 plunged the United States into the war, and the vague concern over a German bomb became a frantic, high-stakes race against time. The U.S. government decided to commit to an undertaking of unprecedented scale and secrecy. It was given an innocuous name, the Manhattan Engineer District, later known to the world simply as the Manhattan Project. Its goal was terrifyingly simple: build an atomic bomb before the enemy did. To lead this monumental task, the government chose two unlikely partners: General Leslie Groves, a gruff, no-nonsense military engineer who had just overseen the construction of the Pentagon, and J. Robert Oppenheimer, a brilliant, charismatic, and deeply complex theoretical physicist. Groves was the builder, the organizer, the force of will. Oppenheimer was the visionary, the scientific soul who could unite the world's greatest minds. Together, they would build a secret empire dedicated to creating a weapon that would change not just the nature of war, but the fate of humanity itself. The Manhattan Project was not a single laboratory. It was a hidden nation to achieve the impossible. The U.S. government conjured an entire secret civilization stretching from the deserts of the Southwest to the forests of the Southeast, all shrouded in a fog of purpose-driven secrecy. Most of the 130,000 people who worked on it had no idea what they were truly building. 3 secret cities formed the heart of this empire. The first was Los Alamos, New Mexico, a remote, dusty mesa chosen by Oppenheimer for its isolation and stark beauty. This was the project's brain. Here, Oppenheimer assembled a dream team of scientific giants: Enrico Fermi, Richard Feynman, Niels Bohr, and dozens of others, many of them refugees who knew firsthand the threat they were racing to defeat. They lived with their families in a hastily constructed town, surrounded by barbed wire and armed guards. Their mail was censored, their calls monitored. They were tasked with solving the most complex theoretical and engineering problem in history: how to turn a physics equation into a functional weapon. The second city was Oak Ridge, Tennessee, a valley once home to a few scattered farms was transformed overnight into a sprawling industrial complex. Its sole purpose was to enrich uranium. Natural uranium contains less than 1% of the fissile isotope uranium-235, the key ingredient for one type of bomb. To separate it was a Herculean task. Enormous factories, some nearly a mile long, were built to house gigantic machines for gaseous diffusion and electromagnetic separation. Tens of thousands of workers, mostly young women, who were told their work was vital to the war effort, sat at complex control panels day and night, monitoring dials and flipping switches, unaware that they were painstakingly refining fuel for an atomic weapon. The third jewel in the secret crown was Hanford, Washington, located on a vast, empty plain along the Columbia River. This was where the second path to the bomb was forged, creating plutonium. Plutonium doesn't exist in nature in usable quantities. At Hanford, enormous nuclear reactors, the first of their kind in the world, were built to bombard uranium and transmute it into this new man-made element. The work was perilous. The reactors generated immense heat and deadly radiation. The process of chemically separating the tiny amounts of plutonium from tons of irradiated uranium fuel was incredibly dangerous. Hanford was the birthplace of the bomb's second core, but also the birthplace of the nuclear age's environmental legacy, a cost that would not be fully understood for decades. These three sites, Los Alamos, Oak Ridge, and Hanford, functioned as a secret, parallel America, a world of coded language, immense pressure, and a single, terrifying goal. By the summer of 1945, the theory had become metal and wire. The scientists at Los Alamos had designed two distinct types of bombs. The first, nicknamed Little Boy, was a simpler gun type device using uranium-235. They were so confident in its design that they decided it didn't need a full-scale test. The second, Fat Man, was far more complex. It used a core of plutonium that had to be compressed by a perfectly synchronized implosion of conventional explosives. It was like trying to squeeze a grapefruit into a marble from all sides at once in a millionth of a second. The physics were so novel, so precarious, that no one could be sure it would work. It might fizzle, or, as a dark joke circulated, it might ignite the atmosphere. They had to test it. The site chosen for this world-changing experiment was a desolate stretch of New Mexico desert called the Jornada del Huerto, or Journey of the Dead. The test was codenamed Trinity. In the pre-dawn hours of July 16th, 1945, the world held its breath. Though it didn't know it, the plutonium device, referred to as the gadget, sat atop a 100-foot steel tower, wired to a web of detonators and sensors. In bunkers miles away, the creators of this device waited in profound tension. General Groves worried about failure and secrecy. The scientists worried about the very laws of physics. Oppenheimer, gaunt and chain-smoking, seemed to carry the weight of all their fears. As the final countdown began, a storm rolled in, threatening to delay the test, but the weather cleared just in time. At exactly 5 hours, 29 minutes, and 45 seconds a.m., the gadget was detonated. For an instant, there was only a silent, impossible light, a flash so brilliant it turned the desert night into a day brighter than any noon, searing the image of the mountains onto the retinas of observers miles away. A blind woman reportedly saw the flash from 120 miles away. Then came the sound of deafening, soul-shaking roar that echoed across the plains. A colossal pillar of fire shot upwards, transforming into the now iconic, terrifying mushroom cloud, billowing 40,000 feet into the stratosphere. The steel tower was vaporized. The desert sand below it was melted into a glassy green substance, later named trinitite. The test was a success so absolute it was horrifying. The observers, hardened scientists and military men, were stunned into silence. Some wept, some laughed with a kind of delirious relief. Oppenheimer, watching the roiling cloud, recalled a line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. In that moment, in that desolate desert, humanity had not just unlocked a new source of power. It had crossed a moral and existential threshold from which there would be no return. A coded message was sent to President Truman, who was in Potsdam, Germany, meeting with Allied leaders. It read simply, "The baby is born." Less than a month after the Trinity Test, the theoretical horror became reality. In the Pacific, the war against Japan raged on with brutal intensity. President Truman, now armed with the world's most terrible weapon, issued an ultimatum: surrender unconditionally or face prompt and utter destruction. The warning was ignored or dismissed by Japan's hardline military leadership. The decision was made. On August 6, 1945, a B-29 bomber named the Enola Gay lifted off from the island of Tinian. In its belly was little boy, the untested uranium bomb. Its target was Hiroshima, a major industrial and military hub, but also a city teeming with civilian life. At 8:15 a.m. local time, the bomb was released. It fell for 43 seconds and then detonated in a silent, blinding flash 2,000 feet above the city. The world below was incinerated. An immense fireball, hotter than the surface of the sun, vaporized everything at the epicenter. A shockwave moving faster and the speed of sound flattened nearly 5 square miles of the city, turning buildings into dust and splinters. A firestorm engulfed what remained in a single moment. An estimated 70,000 to 80,000 people died. Tens of thousands more were grievously wounded, suffering from unimaginable burns. A black, radioactive rain began to fall. Those who survived the initial blast wandered through a hellscape of rubble and ash, their skin peeling off, their world annihilated. Despite the unprecedented devastation, Japan did not surrender. The military leadership was in disarray, some refusing to believe the reports. 3 days later, on August 9th, a second mission was launched. Another B-29 boxcar carried Fat Man, the plutonium bomb, the same type tested at Trinity. The primary target, Kakura, was obscured by clouds. The plane diverted to its secondary target, Nagasaki. At 11:02 a.m., the second atomic sun bloomed over the city, though Nagasaki's hilly terrain contained the blast more than Hiroshima's flat plains. The destruction was still catastrophic. An estimated 40,000 people were killed instantly. The city's industrial core was obliterated. Faced with a second city's annihilation and the threat of more, the Japanese Emperor Hirohito finally intervened. On August 15th, he announced Japan's unconditional surrender. His voice broadcast to his people for the first time in history. The war was over, but the world had been irrevocably changed. The mushroom clouds over Hiroshima and Nagasaki cast a long shadow over the 20th century. They marked the end of one global conflict and the beginning of another, colder one. The questions sparked in those fiery moments continue to haunt us. Was it necessary? Did it save lives by ending the war? Or was it an act of unparalleled brutality? The scientists who built the bomb were left to grapple with their creation. The world was left to grapple with the knowledge that humanity now possessed the power to extinguish itself. The age of fire, born in a cave, had reached its terrifying apex.